Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Pay It Down, How to Create and Stick to a Debt Repayment Plan. My name is Kelly Blount, and I will be today's moderator. We have an exciting agenda planned for you today on the topic of saving and budgeting. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn things over to Todd Moore, Director of Education with Trinity Debt Management, to introduce himself and take us through today's topic.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone joining us this afternoon. Great to be with you. Todd Moore from Trinity Debt Management. It's always great to work with everyone, and we really appreciate your participation this afternoon. We've got a great topic ahead in this next hour. Most of us are well aware of the challenges in our economy. We certainly feel that pinch in our budget. And most of us are trying to figure out, what's the best path forward. So that's really what we're going to do today, is talk about that important challenge ahead of us, how we create a debt repayment plan, stick to that plan, and move us forward. So I wanted to share with you as we go through the presentation today, there's really, while I'm presenting several different methods to you, you'll see, I want you to pay attention as we go through, you'll see some methods where we're relying on budgeting, where there is not any interest rate reduction through that method. You're simply using cash to do that. And then as we move forward, what you'll start to see is different products and services, programs, things like that, that we can look at where we will see interest rate reduction. So a couple broad themes just to kind of keep that in mind as we move through the webinar. But we've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. I always like to start kind of placing us, right in the action. What's going on out in the economy? What's some of the challenges that we see ahead? So, been following closely just the amount of debt that's been carried. Now, this is on, a national scale, tracking some of the statistics through the Federal Reserve, New York, 17.8 trillion. That is a big number. Okay, so what we can see, you look at the types of consumer debts that are being carried: credit card debts, mortgages, home equity lines, student loans. So these are the things that most of us, we have some combination of these types of loans. These are debts that we're carrying. But what we start to do is, the Federal Reserve, they kind of break that down into household data. Other folks, today I'm going to look at some of the Experian statistics and some of the other statistics from the Federal Reserve. We start to kind of disaggregate some of this data, get down into the numbers. What do we see? Well, credit card debt is one of those areas that really jumps out as opposed to some of the other things that you'll see. Why is that the case? Frankly, I believe it's just because folks are using it as a form of supplemental income. So when things get tough and there's challenges in the economy, start to rely on credit cards. And that number is reflected here in the numbers that you see before you: 17.4% jump, and just a reflection of increasing costs, goods, services, certainly food, those sorts of things. So with that comes, the interest rates that have been increased in the last couple of years over inflationary periods. So there's certainly a lot of challenges there. But some of the other numbers, when you disaggregate, looking at averages, you might think, how do I compare sometimes to what else is going on out in the economy? Am I feeling this pinch? What's going on? So I thought I would share with you, kind of place this in a national scale. Average consumer right now with credit card debt somewhere around $6,500. Student loans, this one was actually a little surprising, especially when I look at my own student loan debt. Average student loan debt here, $37,853. But then we get into personal lines of credit, or personal loans, and this can be a whole range of different things. Increasingly, I've seen folks apply for things online, gotten themselves into some trouble doing that, borrowing from different lenders that are available online. Certainly, us working together on this call, before folks, if you have an issue with any type of loan product where you're looking for loans, we certainly want you to come to us, the credit union, first. But personal loans, and I've seen this a lot reflected here at Trinity as well in the overall debts that folks are carrying, 19,402. Again, trying to piece together the budget, trying to make things work. Seeing a lot of that on credit reports as I work with folks to try to improve their credit here at the office. And then, auto loan debts. We're also As you know, supply has been limited in the last couple of years. Almost hate to use the word COVID-19, but we certainly know that that impact, we've talked many times about that impact and what it meant for supply and what it meant for prices. Still seeing those debts high in terms of auto loans as well. So high prices and low wages, tough choices, right? That's where we're at. The other thing here I looked at was just delinquency rates, and what's going on with those delinquencies? What's happening with someone's personal finances? What's the underlying reason? Impact of inflation on expenses. Yeah, we're well aware of that. We experience that probably daily when we go to the grocery, but other factors in here as well. So wanted to highlight a few of those for you. And you can see also work and income. That's always a challenge if there's been hardship in the family. And then, struggling to pay your bills on time. So this is where, look at the number that jumps off here. And that second bullet point, 65% said it just simply comes down to not having enough income to cover expenses. So there's certainly, as we all know, trying to figure this out. And that's really what I wanted to do today, is just kind of point that out. You're not alone. And we're working here with the credit union, and all of us on the call, we share that same goal. What can we do to try to improve this situation to the best of our ability? Just lastly on this, from delinquency to debt spiral, again, we talked about these numbers already, but folks that are getting into that delinquency status, that's that debt spiral that we talk about. That's when things really get challenging. So a webinar like this today, very timely. Once delinquencies start to increase and things start to really become a challenge, that's where debts can truly spiral out of control. We just can't figure out how to make things work. And oftentimes, trying to figure out what's the best method. And today I'm going to show you lots of various methods. Like I said, there'll be, depending on your own situation, how do we break that debt spiral? So first things first, and I talk a lot about this, is about the choices that you make and financial behavior. I've talked about this in some of the other webinars as well, trying to get folks engaged in this. It's a really interesting way to think about personal finances, thinking about what drives us to do certain things, So the reason I pointed this out to us, oftentimes when we're faced with a challenge, and that seems, whether it's risk, problems that we have in our own personal finances, and I notice this oftentimes when I'm working with couples here at the office, getting everyone on the same page. So what we want to do is we want to approach this with the right attitude. If we can change our behavior, we can truly change our personal finances. It's not a cure-all, okay? But the better that we can adjust our financial behavior, the more likely we are to have improved outcomes, okay? So I wanted to point out two concepts here, and then we'll move into some of the other details. But if you're struggling at home and you're trying to get everybody on the same page, the normalcy bias and the ostrich effect. So this first one, these all deal in some ways with how we confront or something that's adverse or something difficult, money issues. So the first one really is where we underestimate the potential negative impacts of something. And where I see this is folks will say, I've already almost maxed out the card. I only have like $800 left on this card. What's it matter now? I'm just going to use it. Okay. Well, again, that type of behavior I see, if you have a couple who is doing that, or your partner is doing that, next thing you know, you got a couple grand in debt by, not holding back or not shifting behavior. That just added to our overall debt load. So, approaching that and saying, hey, everything's going to work out. It's going to be fine. Things will go back to normal. We'll pay it all off. Everything will be fine. Well, now we've carried this debt forward for the next 6 months. So we want to be aware of that. When that starts to trigger in your mind, we want to be aware of that behavior, put a stop to that type of behavior. The other one is this economic concept, the ostrich effect, where really it's this idea that, ostrich would have some type of challenge to put their head in the sand. I've learned recently that ostriches don't put their head in the sand. That's kind of an aside. I thought that was kind of interesting, but it's a great way to think about how you might approach a problem. Again, you avoid the problem. This is kind of a procrastination effect, where you see something and sometimes folks just don't want to look at the problem. I know I have an issue. Now, if you're on this call today, you're here to take action. So, but you may be with someone or working with folks in the family that maybe this is a problem for them. So we want to nudge them forward and say, hey, let's get things together here first so that we can make all those needed changes as we move forward. All right, so let's jump right in now to this process. This is really kind of a how-to. The first things we want to do. First thing I want to encourage you to do is we're going to jump right into budgeting. Okay, now, obviously this is not a budgeting webinar, and we've done those in the past and spent some time walking you through various budgets. If you've not gone back and watched some of those webinars, you can find them on the webpage. GE's credit webinar site has all sorts of great information there, but go back and watch some of those budgeting presentations. We talk about a range of budgets that will help you along the way. But when we're looking here, regardless of the approach you take, I'm breaking things down into just its elements. First thing we want to look at is just our basic income and expenses. What do we really have left here? What's our income and expenses? And like I said, we've done some different approaches, 50, 30, 20, zero sum budgeting, all sorts of different things. But let's kind of clear that aside for just a moment and just focus on the fundamentals. What is our bottom line? Because as we approach this topic, the one thing that we have to figure out is how much do we have to work with? If we're going to create a debt repayment plan, we have to have some income or some cash to work with to make this work, okay? So I'm going to encourage you to do that, is really just get to the bottom line. What do we have in terms of income and expenses? Now, I've got a couple things here that I listed for you that I think, if you just want a kind of quick budget, put this thing together. I've put in here the CFPB monthly budget. It's really easy. You could actually Google that phrase. It would pull this budget up. And then there's also a budget calculator on calculator.net. We'll be talking more about calculator.net. Great site with lots of various types of financial calculators that you can use for debt to income ratios. It creates a pie chart for you. It does a lot of great work. But if you're just looking at income expenses, getting to the bottom line, where you're looking at just putting all of your various fixed and variable expenses into a spreadsheet that's just very simple, that you're not creating on your own, and that you don't have to have a learning curve to download something and try to figure it out. This monthly budget that I provided here, you simply put the stuff in, put the numbers in, hit calculate, and it's done. It will show you roughly whether you're positive or negative and by how much. So just want to encourage you to maybe take advantage of that. It's very simple, very, very simple. But again, once we've looked at income and expenses, what are we looking at here in terms of the amount of money that we can reallocate really to put these various approaches that I'm going to talk about here in a few minutes into practice. So what I've tried to do is I've thought about a range from $50 to $1,000. Now, obviously $1,000 is a lot, but for a couple, that's working together, it's probably doable. Okay, there's ways that I'm going to show you that we can get there, but obviously this is, it's not a one size fits all here. So we've got some variation, but at minimum, $50 a month. Okay, now you'll have to follow along as we move through it on this presentation, but I think what you'll see is these increments truly make a difference when we use our financial calculators. And so I've projected out when we have some financial challenges, this is not something that's just quickly done. Oftentimes we're going to be using methods, and this may be, a 24-month turnaround. Paying off a larger amount of debt, there is some time to be able to turn that around. So first thing, allocate those expenses, figure out where we're at, get a good read on the bottom line. Let's figure out how much, and then I'm going to show you the power of these increments and how it really can create and put into practice your debt repayment plan. Talked a lot about in the past about tracking expenses. This particular approach, really what we're talking about here is two things. One is changing behavior, and then the other part of that is looking at how much money we can actually find in cash expenses. Okay, so we've got the GE money management tool that you can use. That's also online. You can use the mobile app. You've got to engage with this process to make it work. Okay, we talk a lot about tracking, but here's the goal. You know, as we move forward, what you'll see is, in addition to monthly minimums, when we start to track expenses and find an amount, you know, $50, $100 a month that we can find to allocate towards these outstanding debts, that's where we start to see our debt repayment plan really come into focus. So I'm going to encourage you to, as you're going through that budgeting process, make certain that you're also tracking through time, tracking expenses with that goal of finding additional money, $50, $100, you know, additional cash that you can find through this process. Now we're going to get into this idea of just obtaining a credit report itself. Now, this is where this is important, because as you go through your credit report, obviously there's going to be a lot of information there. Okay, now I've noted here on the slide that we can work with you through this process. So you're not doing this alone. We work as a partner with GECU, the credit union, and again, here to help you and support you through this journey. So if you pull a credit report, though, one of the things we want to look at is, you know, how do you prioritize everything that you have? So I've kind of looked at it from this particular perspective, and you'll notice here I've kind of rank ordered things. Obviously, anything that's our highest priority in terms of just making sure that we have a strong debt repayment plan, active open accounts. So if you have accounts that we don't want them to go into, you know, an adverse status, late payments, charge-offs, anything like that, we want to keep our active and open accounts. Even if it's monthly minimums right now, we want to keep those accounts active and open, keep them strong. And then we look at secured, unsecured debts. Again, these can be a range of different things, you know, student loans, mortgages, car loans, or personal lines. Again, those things too are active open accounts, but in terms of overall risk itself, anything that's secured is a higher priority than what would be unsecured debt. And then as we move towards the bottom of our priorities, you know, medical or collection debt, unless there's some type of legal action or something against you. Okay, so knowing that we can't do all things, we have to try to figure out how to prioritize. So first things we would want to do is just take a look at this kind of hierarchy and things that would have the most adverse impact on our credit, or that would result in some type of adverse impact for a charge-off, something like that. We rank order those accounts. Other things that we can do, and I've kind of talked about this, but you know, sometimes you may be delinquent. What's a quick fix to some of these accounts that may be, maybe you're over the credit limit, or over, you know, if you've gotten beyond 30 days. You know, we don't want to allow, you know, generally for charge-off status, we're talking about somewhere between, you know, 90 to 120 days. So as we work our way through this process, want to make certain that you don't allow accounts to go into charge-off status. So again, this allows us to kind of rank order or prioritize where we're at. And I've listed a number of these things, but I'd probably say the most on this slide here, focus on that delinquency rate. So if you're running behind, let's catch those accounts back up. Let's get back on track so that we don't continue to have adverse credit impact. So now I'm going to shift a little bit here and get you into, we're going to get into some numbers. All right, so get some coffee. Stay strong with me here as we move into some of the numbers. So this is where we get into applying the calculator. Or I'm sorry, this is the budgeting method, but that the $50 that I talked about, let's just take two scenarios here. In the first scenario, what we have is that $2,700 account that we owe. So typically it would be calculated at 3%. So I've given you what the monthly amount is currently. So let's say you're paying $81 a month on that at a 28.5% interest rate. So if you continue on that path, and I'm just breaking this into just a single credit card at this point, okay? But you're going through the budgeting method, and this is the route that you're taking. If you continue, it would take you 67 months to pay it off at that rate. okay? And by the time it's paid off, it's $5,413. Now, this is why I said it's so important to track, create the budget, figure out how we're going to solve this debt repayment problem. So if we add $50 a month to that monthly minimum payment, which is $131, this takes us down to 2 years and 5 months. That's the power of $50, okay? So that account that would have taken us, now obviously we may have, 3, 4, 5 credit cards, retail, etc. We may have something in there, some mix of those types of accounts. So, we have to kind of pull this apart in some different ways. But what I'm stressing here is just, this is why it's so important to set up a budget and also to track those expenses. So the more that we can find through that process, you really start to see we're shifting that monthly minimum, and it will really shave the interest. You're just playing against the interest to bring these accounts down so they're manageable. And again, I'm trying to focus on a 24-month time frame. It's not always going to fit within every one of these models that I show you, but most of them are kind of assuming how do we pay off within a couple years. So let's go back to that example. I've added $50 to that account. Now I'm down to 2 years, and you can see we're at that rate of 131 just with budgeting and tracking my expenses. That account will be paid off now rather than 5 years, but in 2 years, okay? The next one we would look at here is when we got these 3 credit cards, and I've kind of calculated these out to be $79.50. And it's a range of cards, we're carrying different ones, kind of looking at the interest rates here that range from 28.5 all the way to 22%. And by the way, I think the national average right now is 24.74, I think is where the national average is at. And then for other credit cards in the retail market, it's as high as 30%. So for our example here today, though, showing you that our monthly minimum payment here is $287. Well, we're looking at 3 years at that amount, okay? So what happens is we've got to figure out how do we budget our way through this. $100 is where I'm going to try to, through my budgeting process and tracking, and try to get to that $100 level. So I'm adding that to the monthly minimum. And then you can read along with me here. Doing that, moving our monthly minimum payment up to $387, then we're down to 2 years and 3 months, okay, with fixed payments over that period of time. Now, I know it's a lot of numbers and a lot of percentages, but what we're saying here is that you can see whether it's $50 or $100 in addition to that monthly minimum, and doing that consistently through time, that the budgeting method does work, and it can keep us within that 24-month time frame. And here, as I've noted in the slide, using the budgeting method alone, it's not looking at interest rates necessarily. There's no program attached to it. You're just doing the work through budgeting. So again, we're going to kind of shift as we go through time, look at some other ways, but this gives you a great example of just the power of, increasing those monthly minimums every month through time, creating that process and how that will shift our overall debt level. All right, so some of us now, in addition, we're thinking, now some of us have different, our plans are different, our priorities are different, we may have different types of credit. So I thought I would include this slide here about accelerating car loan repayment. And so I'll share this with you. In this example right here, we're looking at a monthly payment around $411. Okay, and we still owe $2,400 on our loan. Got a 72-month loan, and the goal here is, again, using budgeting, tracking our expenses. I'm looking for $100. And then I'm going to move my monthly minimum payment to $511. If I can do that, I will shave this loan down and pay off within 1 year and 4 months, as opposed to the 72 months. I mean, that is a huge change. So that's the power of really increasing these monthly minimums and seeing how important that is, just shifting through budgeting and changing behavior, how that can accelerate loan repayment and change and work through our debt repayment plan. Now, a couple items here, keep in mind as well. So at the credit union, in order to do this, one thing you could do is round up or automate payments towards your car payment. So if that car payment is $411 on X date, we automate to add an additional $50 or $100 to that, monthly. And, this is how we accelerate that repayment plan. And we can kind of, one of the budgets I presented for was an automated budget where we just kind of set this up for you, what we call set it and forget it. So go back and watch that webinar that we had on budgeting. I talk a lot about those details, but rounding up payments to kind of meet this overall goal and how that can really improve the debt repayment. Again, trying to target somewhere around that 2-year marker. Lump sum payments as well. I mean, if you can do both of these, that's all the better. Tax time, you put a larger lump sum towards something or any type of windfall, a bonus, a refund, whatever those things may be. I know it's difficult in an inflationary period to think about doing this, but that money really does make a difference. A lump sum, in addition to rounding up, you're well on your way in terms of just accelerating the car loan repayment. And that's another part of your debt plan, diminishing that amount of debt through your plan and how that will open, things up in 24 months for you, how you move these debts aside. And then lastly, these add-ons or anything that may be within a car loan, taking them off, dealer fees, things like that. Often it's best to do that up front, but again, just as an aside, those are some of the things that you may be paying for that are unneeded. Let's move those out and roll that money towards accelerating the overall loan itself. And then the next one that I'm going to give you is a debt consolidation loan. Okay, so now this is that shift that I was talking about where in the last two examples, we're just simply looking at our own cash. Okay, it's not necessarily anything that we did to adjust the interest rate itself. We're just using our own money to really beat the interest, accelerate that loan repayment, add to the monthly minimums, target a 24-month time frame, and then put that plan into motion. Now, where this is different is this looks at interest rates itself. So if you are looking in this example, I've kind of given you, I've got kind of a mix between some retail cards and major credit cards. I'm somewhere around $24,000. My monthly minimum payment, it's actually pretty steep. It's $630 at 18.9% interest rate, okay? So continuing on that journey, I'm somewhere around $37,000 in debt, okay? Well, you may be interested in a consolidation loan through the credit union. In this particular case, what we're looking at is the interest rate, which is what you're currently paying now, is 18.92. This particular approach here with a consolidation loan would give you a 5-year term at 10%. So if you look at the differences between the interest rate, here's where with this consolidation loan, you pay off a larger amount at a lower rate, okay? And I've given you a lot of details here in terms of what this will cost. But the idea here is that you're reducing the overall interest rate, going from 18 to 10, and then now you're on these fixed monthly payments, which is lower than what you were paying before. So in this case, we're at $506 a monthly payment. So in this particular case, this is going to be credit score dependent in many ways in terms of what that interest rate would be and how the credit union would work on this loan. But again, as opposed to the previous method, this particular approach for debt repayment or part of your debt repayment plan looks at interest rates. So if you have any questions as we move along about those things, certainly ask that towards the end, or we want to work with our loan officers here at the credit union, figure out if maybe this is a good fit for you. All right, so that was a lot of math and numbers to throw at you, and we'll get back into some of those details here in a moment. But any questions on those things, please let me know. Now I want to kind of conceptually go to, now that we've shown you how those calculators work, kind of put some theory behind that with these three approaches, kind of put the two together, okay? Calculators, the approaches, and show you how to do this. So I've got three fundamental strategies here: credit utilization, interest rate, what we call rollover. All right, so credit utilization. Let's just assume for a moment, and let's assume for a moment that you're using, and I've noted this in my slides towards the end, but I'll reference it now. So if you're using the Experian credit card repayment calculator, which I have towards the end, and you put in the numbers, and you're looking to pay these accounts down. Credit utilization, think about it like this: how much of my credit have I used? So FICO will look at anything beyond 30% as being, that's where we start to see, the closer we are to being maxed out 100%, we start to see the adverse impacts on our score, or we're more likely to be delinquent or in default. So through the credit utilization method, the way this works is we rank order our unsecured debts. In most cases, it's going to be credit card debt. We rank order those from lowest to highest. Okay, we're making monthly minimum payments on everything, but here what we're trying to do is accelerate debt reduction. Okay, so using that calculator that I talked about, whether you use calculator.net for the repayment calculator, or if you use the Experian credit card repayment calculator, what we're doing here in those previous examples, put this to work through credit utilization. You simply put in what you owe, the current interest rate, and then we would look at, trying to figure out, how do I shave this down to 30, how do I get to 30% overall, works in totality. So I did a couple quick ones here, which are not in the slide. I just assumed that I had a $2,500 credit card, okay? And what I'm looking at here was, $75 a month minimum payment. That's that 3% that I talked about of the balance. Take whatever you owe times 3%, gives you that number. That's going to take me 5 years to pay off. And so now what do I do in this particular instance? Using that calculator, okay, and increasing my payment, I can, a $125 payment will shave that off to 2 years. So I went from 5 years to 2 years. And again, that's that power of $50 that I keep talking about. So increasing that payment through time, you really start to see within that 24-month time frame, I can really shift these balances down. So in summary, on credit utilization, the goal here is rank order from lowest to highest. Our goal is to pay down to 30%, not necessarily all the way to zero. Although using calculators, you certainly can do that, but our goal is just to shift our utilization to 30% and then bring it down to zero. This method here, it's very, I think, it motivates a lot of folks. A lot of folks that I've worked with, when they see the credit impact and they see their scores start to go up and their overall debts reduced, in personal finance, it makes a big difference to see that change and how it motivates you. So the credit utilization approach is just, it really does show impact. Interest rates, okay? Here, what we're doing is we're looking at the highest to lowest interest rate. We're not trying to just shave things down to 30% or minimize our accounts to 30% and then pay off later. We're going to go straight to the highest interest rate account first, because the assumption is that's the ones that are just costing us the most through time. So again, we're going to put everything in order from highest interest rate down. But in this case, what we're trying to do is figure out, what will it take to pay off that account within 24 months? Now, if you're not using the calculator, it's going to be very difficult to figure out and to quantify what that is going to look like. Okay, how much money? That's why I keep pushing the calculator, because the calculator.net, you can actually put more than one card into the calculator. So you could say, card 1 through 4 or 5, and then it will tell you exactly the amounts to pay over increments of time to adjust these interest rates. So it may say, for the next 6 months you pay X rate, and then 6 more months you change that rate, and then the final period is going to be another rate. So it really quantifies, you can specify that 24-month time frame for what that amount would be. So looking at interest rate method, however, our goal is really to look at the highest to lowest interest rate, rank order those. So this method here, though, because we're not shaving down the balances around the edges, we're just really focused on trying to do one card. If you're going, without a calculator, this can be a slow kind of movement, because you're not going to see that action in your credit score. But for us, using the calculators, the credit card repayment calculator that I mentioned, This will allow you to place multiple cards in and give you that exact quantifiable amount. And that will really help us put our plan into practice. And then the last method I will show you here for credit cards or unsecured debts is what we call the rollover plan. And the idea here, and again, want to use that credit card calculator, lowest to highest outstanding debts. So we're just going to assume that we have debts that go anywhere from, say, $1,000 to $4,000. What we're doing here is we use that calculator to say, okay, how quickly can I pay off, this card within 12, 18 months? You may choose to do it sooner depending on the amount of cash that you have. So our plan, we maintain monthly minimums on, say, 3 of those cards. And then here we take and put a lot of effort into just making as much effort into paying off one card so that we can take that full account balance once it's paid off. Maybe it's $150 that we're saving, and you roll it forward to the next card. So now our monthly payment went from 75 to maybe 225, and that acceleration. So this method here, the rollover plan, there's a lot of ways to put this into practice with more than one card, but the idea is to use that calculator and quantify what that dollar amount needs to be. And I can tell you, if you can get somewhere, if you can get into, at minimum on the scale, $50, but if you can go across 4 cards, if you can budget somehow, shave down to where you've got money to put at least $200 towards debt repayment, maybe $50 on all 4 cards, you would really start to see that overall method just really come into practice. So these increments, I hope what you're hearing is it doesn't have to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars to move this debt repayment plan forward. It's targeting the funds that you have in the most efficient way. So that's the 3 methods in terms of just strategies, utilization, interest rate, and rollover. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, and if you have any questions as we go forward, again, please ask those questions as we move forward through the presentation. Okay, so what are some other debt management options? We talked a lot there, get a lot of questions sometimes about ways to do balance transfers or other options that we may have. Besides just the calculators and some of the other approaches that I've shared with you. All right, so for credit card balance transfers, folks will say, well, what if I move some of this debt over to a credit card that has 0 APR, and I'll move that debt aside, and how does that function? Well, you may be able to, you may not be able to, depending on your credit score. First of all, APR at 0% interest, when you can find these types of rates, which they do exist, for balance transfers, generally are going to require a higher credit score to be able to do it. And then the caution here for you is that if you can't meet that term, let's say it could be anywhere from 12 to 24 months. If you can't pay off that term, what is that debt level going to look like afterwards? Did you go from an 18% interest rate to 27%? What does that look like? So the challenge here is credit capacity or credit score, and also the interest rate if you cannot meet that 24-month term. So if you're moving this debt and you get that temporary relief and then you wind up paying more long term, it hasn't done you a whole lot of good. So what I would look at here is just place this among the various approaches and options that we talked about, whether or not this actually works for you. And again, if you have questions on this, this is why, we're here to partner with the credit union to answer these types of questions, pull a report for you, kind of figure out whether or not, some of these methods would even work at all for you. But balance transfer, they certainly can work if you can meet that 24-month term, but just be cautious on the interest rates post-term. Unsecured personal lines, here if we're looking at credit union offers various personal loans, again, credit score dependent, but this would be a type of loan where, again, we may do some type of consolidation loan or take out some type of unsecured loan. That's a personal line of credit where we're gonna pay off some credit card debt, and then the idea here is that we're paying it off at a lower interest rate. Kind of goes back to that example I showed earlier. Right now, kind of on average, I'm somewhere around 18.5, 19% interest across some of the debts that I'm carrying. Well, in this case, I'll just take a personal loan, pay it off. Credit score dependent, it's going to look at your debt to income ratio, some other factors, but the caution here to you would be if you pay off those cards, we want to be very careful not to use them, because if you owe the credit union for the loan, the personal line of credit, and then you max out your credit cards, well, now we've got even more debt and we're right back into trouble. So this is why I say focus on behavior and focus on what your overall goals are. Okay. If you can do this wisely, then you can definitely benefit from reduced interest rate. But if we can't shift behavior and we wind up in a situation where we now have two debts as opposed to the one that I currently had, well, you can see that it's not had an impact. We're actually in worse shape. But if you have questions about these types of loans, I think the credit union has some really great options for you. Just reach out to a loan officer, contact the credit union, and really ask some questions about whether or not this would be a good fit for you. Debt settlement itself. Okay, now in a debt repayment plan, as I mentioned earlier, when we pull a credit report, we look at everything. We look at all those accounts that are good standing. We also look at some of the things that maybe have happened in the last couple of years where accounts were charged off. I can tell you through my work that I see charge-offs. It's very common, particularly in this current challenging environment that we've gone through with high interest or just inflation and other challenges, where folks maybe lost a job or just couldn't pay. Something was in collections. Debt settlement can be an option for us. I put a couple things in here about taxes because I'm going to put an if attached to this. Not all of these debt settlement companies actually will use 1099-C, which looks at a charge-off, repossessions, property. There's a whole series of things that fall under 1099-C, IRS. But debt settlement allows you to pay a charge-off at a percentage of the amount owed as opposed to the full balance. But we really want to look at the credit report and how old the account is. So statute of limitations in debt collection is 7 years in Ohio. If you have debt settlement questions, just reach out to me. I can answer in detail all sorts of things about debt settlement. But when we're putting a debt repayment plan together, we'll use multiple strategies to do this work. Focus on credit, focus on our budget, focus on maybe some old accounts that we have. But again, our priorities is always active open accounts and maintaining the good credit that we have. And we kind of work our way back into these kind of settlement offers or other debt management strategies. And then we got a couple other ones that I'll share with you here. Credit counseling, which is what we do here at the office. So here what we're doing is reducing interest rates. So you'd make a monthly minimum payment or make a monthly payment to Trinity. Credit counseling reduces your overall interest rates. You'll have to close the accounts to get those rates. So you'll get rates that go from 2, 6, 7%, depending on the creditor, and then you pay off at that rate throughout the duration of the program. So the trade-off is always that when you close an account, that's how you get the interest rate reduced to 2 to 4% or 6%. And that's really unique to credit counseling organizations or nonprofits to be able to do that. But reach out if you have questions about that. I'd be glad to speak with you about the impact of credit counseling. And then last in a debt management strategy is bankruptcy. This is where we've tried everything else in our debt repayment plan. What else are we supposed to do? I can't get out of this situation. That's where we're really looking at Chapter 7 and 13. Chapter 7, bankruptcy scenario, liquidation, or some type of wage earner plan. So our goal is to keep you out of that situation. We don't want that to happen. But there are situations that health related and all sorts of other factors where sometimes, I run into situations where that is the only option for us. But our goal is always to avoid that when possible. So that is a lot of information, guys. That is a lot of information. Just as you put this plan together, again, talked a lot about the various approaches where we can look at budgeting and using that method. And again, it's so important to try to figure out that bottom line income and expenses. What is the bottom line? How much do I have to work with? And if we can find those increments through our tracking and through just basic budgeting, if we can find, $50, $100, $200, obviously anything that we get in addition to that, I mean, it really puts this plan into motion. But at minimum, somewhere between $50 and $200, you can start to see a debt repayment plan come together, and a reasonable debt repayment plan come together. So we've got lots of tools to use. I've given you a very quick and broad overview of different things that you can do, but I'm hoping that you reach out and utilize us, engage with us. That's why we're here today. If you need some help along this journey, again, you're not alone. Okay, so you can contact us. I'd be glad to do a free credit report analysis for you. It's free to all members. And then we will work with you to try to figure out or align a strategy that best fits your needs. Okay, so it can be kind of a combination of things. I mean, in some cases, it may be a good fit to have a product, a loan, consolidation, those sorts of things. Work with our budget in different ways to automate accounts. So we want this to be a process where you're engaged in this debt repayment plan. And then if you're doing this work on your own, here are those calculators that I mentioned throughout the presentation. So, I've kind of put these in, so you can apply them from the rollover plan, the credit card calculator, individual accounts through the Experian credit card calculator, kind of calculate what those are. And really, it's kind of fun to play around with the calculator because you can really input those minimum payments, start to see what those numbers look like when you increase $50, $100, $150. You really can quantify what those dollar amounts are, and that's our goal. We want to be able to figure that out and then stick with that plan over the next 24 months. Interest rate method. So we talked about the one of our debt strategies was focusing on interest rates. So here, this is calculator.net, but credit card payoff calculator. This will allow you to put multiple cards in with multiple interest rates, and then tell you, it'll calculate and quantify the exact payment amount in those monthly increments and how to pay these accounts down over kind of that timeline that I've established over 24 months. So that is a lot of information. I'm going to close there. And again, any questions, that's my smiling face right there. You can always reach out to me and be glad to help you. And obviously, the credit union would love to work with you. So please let us know what we can do to help, and I'll take any questions that you have now.
All right, thank you, Todd. As Todd mentioned, we'll open it up for the Q&A portion of today's webinar. I know there were some questions that were coming through during the presentation, so we'll just go ahead and get started. The first one, Todd says, how are we supposed to obtain a consolidation loan if we already have delinquencies? It says, my credit history is not great, but I want to fix it. However, I keep getting denied.
Well, this is one of those challenges that I talked about earlier about when we're denied from. So a consolidation loan, we'll look at credit capacity. So the way to think about this topic is we're trying to apply a tool to your particular situation. And what we've got here is because our credit capacity is lower, this particular tool is not the tool that will work best for us. We just can't obtain the loan. So what I would recommend in this particular approach, since we can't do a consolidation loan, you could go back through that budgeting process that I talked about and try to find those increments where we find, $100, $125 extra a month, where we kind of put that together through our budget, using our budget to do this work. Go back and kind of review that process again. So the budgeting method itself would be one option. And then the second option would be for us to use, again, those calculators to try to figure out, if I'm doing this alone, how much do I need to kind of put together this process? Again, taking that money, rolling it into accounts, increasing monthly minimums, trying to go that route, targeting it over a 24-month period. If that's not working, then I would say just call me directly so that I can work with you to pull the credit report, help you establish a budget. And then, you may have to look at a program. I mean, credit counseling may be a good fit for you in that particular situation. So I don't want to, give you just a one size fits all rule, because today was really for us to look broadly and understand that one tool may or may not work in your situation. That's what's unique to your debt repayment plan. But if you're denied, that's one of the challenges with consolidation loans, because it is a loan. So you have to have credit capacity to do it. If that's not the case, then we run through that list that I mentioned and we figure out which one of those tools do we use instead. So I hope that helps.
This next question says, can credit counseling help with delinquent accounts already in collections?
Yes, it can. The only way it cannot is that collection sometimes can be in-house, or sometimes we're talking about a charge-off status. Okay, so if things are delinquent accounts, so long as they're not charged off, written as a bad debt, 90 to 120 days, one of the great things about credit counseling is that we'll re-age the account. So let's say you're 60 days delinquent. Well, credit counseling would bring that account current. It would waive the outstanding late fees on those things, and then it would just bring you current. You start at X date. And let's say it's, where are we at now? September 18th. Let's say you started at the end of September. It would re-age your account, you start fresh, and you have an interest rate reduction. So your interest rate may go from, 24.74 down to 6%, and then you pay off at whatever rate, and depending on how much debt you're carrying. So that's one of the true benefits. And it is really only offered in the nonprofit sector to re-age accounts in that form. And it's really intended just to keep you from bankruptcy. I mean, that's really the fundamental purpose of credit counseling historically, is to keep you out of bankruptcy scenario. So if you have any questions about that, just reach out to me and I can give you more detail about it.
In regards to bankruptcy, this question is asking, if somebody did declare bankruptcy, what are the next steps and how does that affect things?
Well, yeah, declaring bankruptcy, as I mentioned, sometimes is last resort, and there sometimes just isn't any other way to get out of debt. So you'll be looking either at a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13. And in this case, this is why it's so important to be a part of webinar series and work with partners. You're going to need a secured line of credit, or you're going to need some access to rebuilding credit, some credit builder line of credit. So post bankruptcy, what we're always trying to do is reestablish something positive on your credit report. So we need something that's active and open, reporting back to your credit report. So generally, we're looking at some type of secured line of credit, small dollar secured line of credit, $300 to $500, just to basically do credit building, turn a cash expense into opportunity to build credit. So I would encourage you, if that is the situation, maybe go back and watch I think we had a webinar called All Things Credit, where we talk a lot about credit scoring and all sorts of things. I'm going to put a plug in for that webinar as well. We talked a lot about that. Kind of post-bankruptcy scenario was kind of included in that. But short answer, I deal with this all the time. Folks that have post-bankruptcy scenario, really what we're doing is rebuilding your credit capacity. And I can be of help to you to do that. But we also need our credit union partner to do that. So, and General Electric Credit Union is going to be great to work with, but we would be looking at some type of credit builder line or small dollar line of credit just to rebuild your credit history. And then over that next 24 months, we're just working our way through that. I can help you track your score, and we'll get you back in shape. And eventually you're going to need a car and some other things. And that's the next part of the journey. But just reach out to me and I would help you pull a credit report and answer any questions that you have.
And for anyone who would like to go back and listen to the All Things Credit webinar, that can be found on our YouTube page. So just search General Electric Credit Union, and then it's under our playlist, and the title was All Things Credit. So you can find that way. I know we're coming up on our time. I'll try to get through a few more questions. This next one says, can I and is it in my best interest to negotiate creditors for lower payments?
Yeah, negotiating with creditors for lower payments, it's not a very effective strategy, to be honest, because oftentimes it's going to be looking at credit capacity, your credit score. Sometimes there'll be a program in place temporarily. It's usually a short-term fix. So when you say negotiate with your creditor, now obviously if this is a car loan situation or where you need an extended term or you got to modify the loans in terms of conditions of a loan of some sort, that's, again, rank ordering and prioritizing these accounts. Anything that is a challenge where you need some type of structure before something goes into a repossession or something else, please reach out to the credit union or your creditor and let them know. Credit cards functions a little bit differently. When you say negotiate with the creditor, to be very honest with you, it's not an effective strategy, because even if it's offered, which creditors will offer oftentimes, some short-term credit interest rate reduction. It's not significant, but it can be a short-term shift. It will always come back to some default rate. So the best way to deal with this, again, is these debt repayment strategies that we presented today. This is why, again, just focus on that process. Let's get a budget in place. Let's start tracking. Let's pull a credit report, get all that work done as our preliminary work, and then we'll align a strategy to make that happen. So that's where we find, within all those tools that I mentioned, which one of these is going to be effective for your situation and that's unique to you. And we'll figure that out. Again, I would love to work with you on that. Just give me a call. I'll do that work for you. We can work together and figure out what will be the best approach for you. But to be very clear, it's not going to be a long-term fix. It's a short-term approach, and the long-term is really what we need to aim at. So we want a more effective debt management strategy.
Want to fit one more question in. It's asking, how can I stay motivated during my time of focusing on debt repayment?
It's all about goals. It's about where you envision yourself in 24 months. And that's why I've talked a lot about different approaches and whether or not it's about behavior and how you engage in that process. So for instance, if I'm struggling with some outstanding debts, and right now I've decided I'm going to put all my effort into just that one card with a high interest rate, that's going to be very difficult for most of us, because we all carry more than just one level of debt or one card. So if I'm putting all my effort into one thing, it tends to be fatiguing. So what I would do is I would shift your behavior, keep you motivated by you seeing your engagement and the outcomes of your labor and your money and your time. So the way that we would do that is, I would probably recommend to you, we would shift over towards a rollover approach so that you can see how your credit score is being impacted by all the extra time and money and effort you're putting into something. And that's why I focus so much on what motivates an individual towards their repayment goal. If I can shift that strategy, it should, I think, show you how it's effective and why it's so important in the long run. It's really just about aligning the goal in a different way. But the more I can engage you in that process, the more likely you are to stick within that process and just stay focused. So again, reach out to me. That's why I'm here. I think that, just being able to realign your strategy, you're going to find that you're going to find a lot of motivation once you find that strategy that really shows you an impact of your work and your time.
All right, thank you, Todd. We are up on our time, so that is going to conclude our Q&A session for today. As Todd mentioned, if you have any questions, his contact information is up on the screen. You can feel free to reach out to Todd directly to discuss your questions, or you can always email events@gecreditunion.org, and I can help get your question over to Todd for you. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.